While we in the West finally got a taste of Overdress with the release of the first starter decks, Japan got a taste of what upgraded Overdress feels like with the release of Festival Collection 2021. Stand up, Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another set review, and today we're going to take a look at the upcoming Festival Collection 2021. Now this is going to be a unique set review because usually I'm going to split them up per nation, but the scene as Festival Collection only got 10 new cards and the rest are reprints. I thought, let's just make one video explaining them all in one go because it's unnecessary to split them up per nation as we only got 2 cards to talk about per nation. Now as seen as this is a reprint set, we can ignore most of the cards as we already discussed them in the previous set review when we went over set 1, as well as the starter deck. If you haven't seen those, links on top if you want to have more in-depth analysis about these cards. But we're going to take a quick overview to what actually is in this set to understand what we can expect if you buy packs or booster boxes of this particular set. Now in this set we see a total of 11 cards per nation, from which 9 are going to be reprinted. Now from those reprinted we know that 4 of them are going to be the basic triggers of the starter deck, and on top of that we also see the right line excluding the grade 3 in normal tripwire foiling. And on top of that we also see 2 specific key cards from the trial deck, which for Dragon Empire are Trickstar as well as for Arena. For Dark Stage we see Acrobat Presenter and Time Fissuring Fist Colossus. For Keter Sanctuary we see the grade 3 order card, The Hour of Holy Judgment Cometh, as well as the grade 3 Knight of Broadaxe Refluke. Now for the Stoicheia reprint we see the grade 1 Knight of Friendship Cyrus, as well as the grade 2 Sylvan Horn Beast Duger. And finally for the Brandt Gate reprint from the starter deck we see the order card, which is Galaxy Central Prison Galactolus, as well as the grade 1 Automatic Caution for the final reprint for that nation. Now all these reprints are going to be in tripwire foiling, so that's a nice way to upgrade your deck if you want to be a bit more fancy. But on top of that we also got an SP reprint of all the main cards from the starter deck, which complete the full picture, which is basically the entire right line, as well as the heal trigger and crit trigger that completes the artwork. And you can see them in the screen right now, which cards there are and how these SP actually look. And that concludes all the basic reprints. So again, if you want to have an in-depth analysis about these cards or the certain cards that have skills and how they work, you can check out the original set review of set 1 plus the starter deck to know more information about those cards. Now with that said, let's actually get into the new cards from this set and see how good they are and rank them for the potential upgrades to the respective nation. And we're going to start off, of course, with Dragon Empire. And for Dragon Empire we've got a brand new grade 1 within the Blaze Maiden archetype, which is Blaze Maiden Mirin. And Mirin has the ability, on a rearguard circle, when your unit with the Overdress ability attacks, put this unit into your soul, choose one of your units with the Overdress ability, and it gets power plus 5k until the end of turn. Now this is an interesting card because it activates on the attack declaration of a different unit, and then it puts itself into the soul to give any Overdress unit plus 5k power. And that means you don't have to give the power to the unit that activated this skill in the first place, which is a bit more flexible. And the main synergy that is going to be had with this card is that you can use the original Verena to activate this skill, then put her into the soul, and then potentially Soul Blaster out with Verena to retire something else, as we don't have a lot of good ways to soul charge to fuel the normal Verena Soul Blast 2 ability to keep popping units onto the board. This is a nice way to support that, and it's probably the main way how this card is boosting the Overdress archetype. You could also synergize it with Valiente as the powers at the end of turn, not at the end of battle, but your opponent will probably block the attack for Valiente, so you do not get double value of that 5k. And that's where the problem is that I have with this card. You lose a rearguard for a soul and only 5k power. I don't really like that, especially with the fact that this is a 6k grade 1, thus you're sacrificing a lot of your early aggression for making good numbers. This cannot make a 20k column with your 12k grade 2 Vanguard unit, thus sacrificing a lot of aggression, especially if your opponent hits a defensive trigger. Now granted, if you went first and your opponent is still at grade 1, this is a non-issue, because you make an 18k column and 18k against 8k is still a magic number even if they hit a defense trigger. But if you went second, completely different story because they're 10k. So you need to weigh these options if you want to play this card. I currently don't really like this card as much, and because of that I can only give it 2 stars, as I wish there was more to be had here. If she was at least 8k, different story, because she could be utilized in multiple situations. But for some reason Bushro likes to give the Blaze Maiden units awkward numbers, and I don't know why that's the case. Now, being on the subject of being awkward, we've got a brand new grade 2 for Dragon Empire, which is Rough Eating Dragon Hungersaurus. And this grade 2 has the ability, continues a rearguard circle. During your turn, this unit gets power plus 5k, and if your opponent has a front rearguard, this unit cannot attack the Vanguard. First off, being a 15k attacker without any condition is great. This is something that UG needs because its 15k attackers are behind the claws, and if you cannot retire those units, you just have a 10k vanilla. This at the very least is also going to be a 15k attacker. Now the problem with this thing is that if your opponent has just one rearguard in the front row, it's basically a dead card. Because you are forced to attack into it, and that means you're wasting the power of this card, or potentially the power of the column, on nothing, which is really bad. And yes, you can say, well, you can just snipe the front and rearguard, so what's the problem? You can easily retire it. In most cases, if you could not activate the grade 2 that also has the 15k power potential, if you cannot activate that ability, which is that your opponent has 2 or less rearguards, it's very much likely that they will also have a unit in the front row, because the front row is probably the first things that you're going to clear. I don't really see the value of this card. The fact that you could potentially waste an attack for nothing is really bad. So yeah, again, for me, it's going to be a 2-star. Maybe if we get more consistent retire options that aren't restricted to where your opponent's units are, either in front row or back row, then maybe this card becomes a lot more playable. But currently, with the limited amount of retire options, it's a bit too risky in my books. Now, from Dragon Empire, we go to Dark States. And for Dark States, we got a brand new grade 1, which is Degraded Aged Dragon. And this card has the ability, although when this unit is placed in a rearguard circle, if your soul has 5 or more cards cost, discard a card from your hand, choose one of your opponent's back or rearguards, and retire it. So this is a 1-for-1 trade. You should discard a card from your hand to retire something from your field. But on top of that, it's on a on-place effect, which is fine and all. But then also you need to have 5 or more soul. Why is that a requirement on this card? This card would have been fine if it just was on place, discard a card to retire, to pop something. To also then put the 5 soul on top of it seems unnecessary for this type of skill. It's not that you gain value or something. Like, it's still too restrictive, and for that I think it's going to be only 1 star, because on top of the fact that it's a 1-for-1 trade with an annoying restriction on top of it, it can only hit back row units. And spoiler alert, but back rows are probably the least filled of all the circles, because your opponent probably will fill front rows first to attack for a lot of things, unless they're going to put a booster behind the Vanguard. But I see more often that the back row is empty, but the front row is filled. And if that's the case, this card is dead. But that said, a card that we'll definitely see play is the other grade 2 support for Dark States, which is Diabolus Boys Jared. And Jared has the ability, act on rearguard circle once a turn, cost counter plus 1 and soul plus 1. Choose one of your units with Diabolus in its card name, and it gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. So this is great support for Bruce, as it can give your Jared, your Richard, your Eden, your Steves, or even Bruce himself an additional 10k power buff. And the great thing about this is that it's early game. You don't have to be on Bruce. You don't have to be in Final Rush. The only thing that you need is to have a Diabolus unit on the field. And spoiler alert, he himself has a Diabolus name. So if he's your only unit, you can still give the power to himself, thus creating more powerful attacks in the early game, which helps with the lack of pressure that you generate in the early game. But on top of that, it also has the ability on a rearguard circle. When its unit attacks, if you are in Final Rush, your opponent cannot intercept until the end of the battle. So it's a nice way to also remove interceptors from the equation, especially if he's going to be a weak attack. That means your opponent is still forced to put cards from their hand onto the board to even guard the attack. Now, of course, it's going to be a solid 5-star card for me, because this card fixes a lot of issues for Bruce. It gives you the early game that you need to do something, but it's also flexible enough that it's also during your Final Rush turns a devastating card, because you can give a unit plus 10k power that's going to restand, which is double value. And more importantly, you can give that 10k to Eden, which comes with the crit pressure and also comes with the hit pressure of potentially retiring stuff. So it's a really nice card to increase the early game pressure, as well as having late game potential to make your turns even more devastating. So Jared is, in my opinion, probably the best card out of this set, period, and it's going to help Bruce a lot. Now, if we go to Keter Sanctuary, we see a brand new grade 2, which surprisingly isn't great now, but has a lot of future potential, as we have Gold Gaon. And Gold Gaon has the ability Auto, when his unit is placed in a rearguard circle, cost Soul Blast 1, and call a grade 1 from your rearguard circle. And the unit called for this cost gets power plus 5 until the end of turn. So you place this, you call a grade 1 from hand, and gets 5k power. It costs you a soul to do that. And you might think to yourself, what's the point of doing that? In generic sense, you waste a soul to give 5k power to a grade 1, and you can only do that if you can call a grade 1 from your hand, which doesn't sound that great. But the thing about this card is that it's conditioned to activate the skill. It's just when placed in a rearguard circle. It doesn't matter when it happens or how it happens. So if we're going to get multi-tech potential where we can call units during the battle phase via any way necessary, you can use this card as a potential extender of that multi-attack, because this then can call another grade 1, which can either be a booster for your attack, or it can call to the other column, thus creating 2 attacks instead of 1. So there is a lot of potential here to be had, but the potential isn't utilized at all. Until we get that, this card is kind of useless in standard. In premium it could see potential, but in standard, in overdress format, not so much. But that could all change whenever we get a new playstyle, a new ride line that does focus on that playstyle. So keep this card in the back of your head whenever such a skill arises, because then suddenly this card becomes relevant. And because of that, I think it's gonna be a solid 3-star card for me. Like, it's good, it's generically fine, but it has a lot of potential, and I think therefore it warrants at least 3 stars. Now, the second card that we've got for Keter Sanctuary is, in my opinion, a very disappointed card, especially since it's a box art, as we've got Harbow of Heavenly Music Elvian. And Elvian has the ability, act on rearguard circle once a turn. If you have 3 or more grade 3 units, cost countless 1. This unit gets power plus 5k until the end of turn, and if your persona wrote this turn, draw a card. This skill is bad. Countless 1 for 5k power, you know how I think about it, it's terrible. Then you could say, well, you could potentially draw a card. But the problem is, it's behind the persona right clause. And those aren't consistent enough to warrant the value behind them. Yes, in some situations you can countless 1 to draw a card at 5k power. But even then, the value behind it is fine. It's not amazing, it's fine. And because it's fine in the most optimal situation, which is highly inconsistent, it's not good. Especially since in most scenarios, you're gonna count plus 1 to gain 5k power, whereas you have other grade 3s that just on attack gain 5k power, or gain even more power by just shoving them into the soul or something like that. So for me, this is going to be a 1-star card. I do not like this card. I don't see any future potential. Even if we can persona right on a consistent basis, I don't think this is worth it, and there probably are better cards out there that can do the same or even more. Now that said, we are now entering the Stoicheia card, and for Stoicheia we've got a very unique grade 1, which is Sylvan Hornbeast Corsi. And Corsi is a grade 1 with no shield, 15k power, and the ability continues, this card cannot be ridden or called other than the back row center. So basically, this is a card that can only be called to the back row rearguard circle behind your Vanguard. That's the only thing this card can do. But by being there, it can be a 15k booster for your Vanguard, which is actually solid. It can make very good numbers, or in Magnolia's case, can be a 20k attacker as it gains the extra 5k, thus having a solid attacker out there. Now, I'm going to be real here, it's going to be a 2-star card for me because it's very, very specific how this card can be used. It is generic that it can be a 15k booster and that there is value behind it, especially if you can call it in the early game to have such strong numbers behind your Vanguard. But it's such a small window of opportunity and it can only be called there. So if you run multiple copies, they are dead cards because they have no shield value at all. It's literally a dead card for the rest of the game if you cannot call it to the back row rearguard circle anymore. Even in Magnolia, it's kind of underwhelming because it comes with 20k attacker. That's basically the same number of pressure you're gonna generate with the grade 1 ride line as that becomes an 18k attacker. The 18k hits them the same magic number as the 20k in most situations. The only situation that it matters if you went first and your opponent is still at the grade 2 10k threshold. Then it will matter, but after that turn, it won't. So it's very specific and very niche situations that's good, but aside that, not so much. So therefore, it's going to be a 2-star card. Maybe we're going to get more ways to abuse this card, but I don't really see that happening. So yeah, it's kind of unfortunate for what it is. An interesting concept to try out at the very least, but sadly, it fails in my book. Now, the second card that we've got for Stoicheia is a brand new grade 3, which is Hydro Rail Dragon. And Hydro Rail Dragon has the ability Auto Rearguard Circle. When this unit attack hits a Vanguard cause, retire this unit, choose a grade 3 unit from your drop, and put it into your hand. Basically, it's a unit that allows you to get your persona right to your hand, as you can hit it, it retires itself, and then get the grade 3 that your persona wrote, or maybe you discard it for something, or whatever it happens to be in a drop zone. You can get it to your hand, and now you can persona write next turn. But even in case you don't have a persona write, it can recycle itself as it retires and then fetches, and it's incidentally happens to be a grade 3, thus it can fetch itself from the drop zone. Is this good? It's kind of whatever. I'm gonna give it 3-star card because it's another way to get more consistent access to a persona ride. And especially in Stoicheia, having Magnolia being a thing, being able to persona ride more consistently is very important, so there is at least some value behind it. However, there are some issues with this card because this thing is specifically needs to hit a Vanguard to even activate the skill. You still need to be able to hard draw into the first copy of your persona ride in the first place to even get it into the drop zone, and beyond that, it's kind of whatever outside that scope, and it's a very specific situation. So maybe it's a 2-star, but I want to give the benefit of the doubt, at least put it up to a 3-star card, as at least it gives Stoicheia some way to get persona right more consistently than just keep hard drawing into multiple copies of your grade 3. And now we get to the final nation, which is of course Brandt Gate. And for Brandt Gate, we've got a couple of grade 2s because we have Twin Press Smasher. And Twin Press Smasher has the effect, act on Rearguard Circle once a turn, cost +1, and rest this unit. Choose one of your opponent's front row rearguards and retire it. Again, this for me is gonna be a 2-star card. Like, I don't like this. Count +1 and rest it to retire something from your opponent's field. It's very awkward. Yes, there might be future potential with you resting your own units because Nova Grappler being a thing, and it is a very Nova Grappler-like card. So there might be something, but we're going in blind with this. We don't know if it's ever going to be a thing because Brandt Gate's now all about set order. So who knows whenever we're going to see interactions with resting your own units in the first place. Now, I'm gonna say it is a 2-star, not a 1-star, unlike the Dark States grade 1, because at the very least this does hit the front row rearguards, which mainly are the better units to hit than just back row units. And I say mainly, there are situations where grade 1s are better, but it's more often that the front row rearguard circles are going to have units and have units that actually matter to be retired. So I think there's more value to be had behind this card, and at the very least it can also be used turn after turn after turn because it's an act ability and you can reuse the same copy. Now, as for the second grade 2 that we've got for Brandt Gate, we've got Aurora Battle Princess Spark Limon, and this card has the unique effect, Auto Rearguard Circle. When this unit attack hits, you choose up to 2 unit cards from your opponent's drop and imprison them in your prison. So this is a way for the prison deck to actually put more cards in the prison without needing your opponent to have called units to the field. This is great because this gives more hit pressure after the get-go for free, and it actually can create a situation where you start to gain value over your opponent because now you can actually put cards in the prison without wasting soul or countless. Yes, you give your opponent potentially access to cards that were on their drop because now they can call it from the prison to their field. But as soon as you have control over them, you can just pick the cards that have the least amount of value for them, and that gives them less reason to get them out of the prison. Now, they do have a reason to get them out of the prison, because if they keep them in the prison, your defensive shield value will go up with your units, you will get more powerful attacks, and you have your triple drive of your Vanguard. So if this starts to add up, then suddenly your opponent is in a situation where they cannot win the resource battle anymore, and you start to overwhelm them with the value you're generating. And Limon is a nice addition to tip that balance a bit faster and also a bit more consistently. And at the same time, it's a nice lightning rod for your opponent, because if this thing hits the field, they're gonna guard this thing for everything that they got, and they're probably gonna use more resources to get this thing off the field over something else that you might have on the board. So it's a nice way to maybe mind game your opponent a little bit if you do not mind losing 1 or 2 copies of this card, if you have something else left on the field or you have something else stored that you want to actually save on the board. It's a nice card that definitely will make an impact to some extent, and now maybe we're going to see more cards that will bind or imprison cards from the drop zone, as we see with Limon. So for that, I think it's a solid 3-star card. Like, you might think a 4-star card, but I think it's too early to judge if this type of effect actually will matter a lot. Like, most of this is going to be pure speculation, as it still is an unhit, which is kind of annoying. Yes, it can hit into a rearguard, which is a bit better, but since it's still an unhit, there is a limited amount of value you're going to generate out of it, unless if it was an on-attack skill. But I think it's a bit too early to get that type of skill, so this is a nice start. And for that, for a nice start, I think a solid 3-star card is warranting the amount of value. And with that said, we've seen all the new cards for Festival Collection 2021. Now, of course, this set was kind of underwhelming because most cards were pretty bad or mediocre or not really useful for their respective playstyle. And at the same time, we did saw some new type of design space with prisoning cards from the drop, the new early game potential of Bruce, as well as more direct Overdress support with the Dragon Dancer or Blaze Maidens. So we see more things to be explored here, and who knows if this will be a sign for what's in store for us in the future with set 2, set 3, or set 4 later down the line this year. But with it said, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What you guys think of the new set for Festival Collection 2021? Are you excited for some of these cards? And if you are excited for some of these cards, then head over to parkage.com to pre-order or buy a couple of cards or boxes of this particular set. And of course, don't forget to use the discount code TIMELY5 to get 5% discount on your entire order, as this is probably the perfect time to start expanding your collection as we're prepping for set 2. And with that said, I want to give a huge shout out to my patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or anything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one.